there's a lot of conversation around whether millennials no longer care about brands, they buy online and more private label. Not seeing any of that in China yet. Still that people define themselves by brand, particularly the young generation. It's typically not, and people ask me that a lot and saying, is China brand loyal or Chinese brand loyal? And the answer is yes and no. So the loyalty to an individual brand in China is extraordinarily low. It's incredibly low. Everybody's switching brands all the time. At the same time, it's always switching within a basket of like 2, 3, 4 brands. So you consider like 2, 3 makeup brands you would buy, and you buy those 3. And then you switch between those 3, typically depending on the product and new launches, something new, something cool coming up, and then people get excited about and buy the new product. And they may even switch back. Also resulting in what I shared earlier when I talked about the car companies. People consider 3, 4 brands. There's a new model coming up. I forgot what I got bought last time. I'm going to buy basically a different brand. Whereas in Europe, particularly if you're cars, you have families who over generations and generations will buy the same brand. And the kids buy the same as the fathers, and then the second car is the same car again. You maybe trade up and buy then a bigger car, and then maybe an SUV, and then maybe a sports brand. Chinese would never do that. I think the way Chinese think is like I have 3 brands which I consider, and then I say, okay, what's the best product, what's the best price, and then I bet it. Yes?
Do you know why? Some drivers behind this culturally, or?
I think I looked at it specifically for the car point. And I think the car, I just mentioned the generations of generations. I think that plays into, because today's generation is the first generation was really buying cars in a meaningful manner. There were not a lot of basically private cars 20 years ago.
So they're not influenced?
That's it, right. They're not influenced. The other reason is, or one of the other reasons is also that personal relationship, because in Europe and to some degree also in the US, there is an attachment with the dealership, because you live in that city, you basically know the guy who runs the dealership where you get your car repaired, you have a relationship with him, you trust him. And if you go here in the city, you see like 50 Volkswagen dealerships in Beijing, 30 BMW dealerships in Beijing. So it's typically, and then there's a lot of change in basically people who are working there. So nobody would say I have a relationship with my car dealer. My car dealer has a job to fix my car, and that's it. It's a very transactional nature. There's no relationship. It's nothing personal. So I think that in the car example is driving that. And then also to some degree, if you talk, I mentioned cosmetics as another example, right? Why people switching cosmetics so much, because there's no, per se, not a dealer there. Online share is very high. And I think online share automatically leads to being more exposed to basically new product, and then also basically seeing friends. I think the social media play a big role there. It's online share in cosmetics in China is above 30%. And it's substantially lower, maybe half of that or less than half of that if you go to the US. So you talk about a different basically consumer. And then also we've seen Double 11. Actually, I should have talked about Double 11 as well. You see what is happening, which is building up, which is basically creating so much awareness of the new brands and new promotion, which also yet again drives specific basically changes in consumption. Is that a question?
Do you think it's, you know, whether it's attractive to lock users in by, for instance, increasing switching costs?
Sorry, I need to come closer.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to lock Chinese users in by, for instance, increasing switching costs, or are they also more willing to switch despite any sunk costs?
Yes. Actually, I think this is a good answer to the question asked before, because part of the reason why also people are switching, because the switching costs are lower. Because I think, of course, the dream of every company would be to increase the switching cost. But in general, the switching costs in China are extremely low. Because it's such an online-driven, basically, country. It's also a country where you don't necessarily possess products so long, but you're actually much more culturally known to like changing products more often. So in general, I think it would be, you're right, it would be a good strategy to increase switching cost. But so far it's been very difficult, and typically switching costs remain quite low.
Where do you expect it to go with online gaining more share, which favors switching the products, but like the economy becoming less dynamic over time, so there's more these dealers that you know from last generation social. Which way do you think is stronger?
I think the first. I think it will stay very volatile. It also has to do with the nature of the cities. And I'm not just talking from a Beijing perspective, right? China has so many cities which are above 1 million people. Whereas in Europe, you have like cities where like 50,000 people, 30,000 people, or even less are living. So if you have less people, then everybody knows each other. So you have a much closer personal basic relationship than when you live in Beijing, where you have like 25 million people.
So you see that differently in the rural areas here in China?
There's not so much consumption in the rural areas, but it would be. It's an interesting point, actually. It would be interesting for us to look into that, whether you see less volatility in the rural areas, and that may be the case. It's just from consumption really very small.